Do you ever feel like your mouth shuts down even when your brain knows the words? What if you could train your mind to respond faster, like a native speaker? Hello! My name is Angelina, and today I want to tell you something personal, something real. This is the story of how I trained my mind to think faster and speak smarter in English, even when I had no idea what to say. I didn't grow up in the US, but I live here now, and learning to speak naturally, like everyone around me, became my mission. I was tired of freezing up in conversations, overthinking every word, and feeling like my brain couldn't keep up. But guess what? I changed that. Step by step, thought by thought. And now, I'm here to show you how. I used to think that speaking fast meant speaking well. I thought if I could shoot out words like a machine gun, people would think I was fluent, smart, even cool. But the truth? That mindset nearly wrecked my confidence. I remember this one specific day that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon in downtown Chicago, and I had just finished work. I was heading into a local coffee shop I visited often. I walked up to the counter, ready to place my usual order, but the moment the barista looked up and said, "Hey, what can I get started for you?" my brain just froze. I blanked out. I forgot the word iced, the word I had used so many times before. And in that awkward moment, all I could say was, cold coffee, please. The barista smiled and asked, "You mean iced coffee?" I nodded, feeling my face go red. It felt like my brain had betrayed me. I knew the word. I had said it 100 times. So why couldn't I say it then? That moment haunted me for weeks, not because it was a huge mistake, but because it reflected something deeper. I realized I wasn't actually communicating. I was rushing. I was so focused on keeping up, I never gave myself time to show up. I had spent years practicing grammar, memorizing vocab, repeating phrases from YouTube videos, but when it came to real conversation in the US, I was racing against myself and losing. It's like my brain was sprinting on a treadmill with no time to pause and take a breath. And every time I tried to speak fast, I'd trip over my own words. So I made a radical decision. Radical for me, at least. I told myself, "Angelina, slow down. Not just in speech, but in thought." I started small. The next day, I went to the same coffee shop. I stood in line, and this time, I rehearsed quietly in my head, but not in a rush. I told myself, "Take a second, breathe, say it clearly." When it was my turn, I smiled, made eye contact, and slowly said, "Can I please have an iced coffee with vanilla?" The barista smiled back, punched in my order, and said, "Got it." Just like that. No awkward moment, no freeze up. And that was the first time I felt like I had some control over my English. From there, I started practicing this slow to go smart technique everywhere. When I was at the grocery store, I'd take a moment before asking an employee where the almond butter was. I'd think through the sentence in my head, not word for word, but just the idea. I stopped worrying about the perfect grammar. I focused on being clear. At work, during meetings, I would pause before speaking, even if it meant 2 extra seconds of silence. I used to think people would lose patience if I didn't jump in fast. But something surprising happened. They didn't mind. In fact, they listened more. One of my coworkers even said, "I like the way you think before you talk. You always sound thoughtful." That moment gave me so much confidence. I began to understand something powerful. Slowing down isn't weakness, it's a strategy. Americans appreciate clear, confident communication. It's not about using big words or speaking quickly, it's about being present. I started paying attention to how native speakers talked. I noticed they paused. They took time to phrase their thoughts. They didn't rush every sentence. They emphasized. They breathed between words. I realized maybe I was trying too hard to sound American, when in reality, Americans value people who sound authentic. It was like a switch flipped in my head. I stopped trying to perform in English. I started having real conversations, and this shift affected everything. My brain started catching up with my mouth, not the other way around. Instead of reacting instantly, I gave myself space to respond thoughtfully. For example, at work, when my manager asked, "How's the project going?" I didn't panic. I smiled, took a second, and answered, "It's moving well. I finished the first 2 sections, and I plan to wrap up the third by Friday." Clear, simple, confident. I didn't over-explain. I didn't ramble. I just slowed down, thought through my response, and delivered it calmly. The more I did this, the more my coworkers began including me in deeper discussions. And it wasn't because my grammar was perfect. It was because I sounded grounded. Slowing down also helped with my pronunciation. When I rushed, my words blurred together, and people would ask me to repeat myself. But when I slowed down, I had time to shape each word properly. My mouth moved with intention. I started recording myself reading short texts out loud. At first, it felt awkward, but hearing my own voice helped me notice the areas I was rushing. I'd play it back and practice again, slower this time. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that speaking well isn't about speed. It's about clarity and rhythm, like music. And every time I gave myself that extra moment to think and breathe, my speech sounded more natural. But here's what really sealed the deal for me. One day I was talking with my friend Emma. She's from Texas and speaks super fast. I told her I was practicing slowing down to speak better, and she said, "Honestly, I wish I did that more. You always sound so clear. I feel like I rush my words all the time." That made me laugh. All this time I thought I needed to catch up to native speakers, but they were admiring the way I paced myself. That conversation changed how I saw myself as an English speaker. I wasn't just a learner anymore. I was someone with a style. And that style was thoughtful, calm, and smart. Of course, there were moments I slipped up. I'd get nervous in big meetings or social events and fall back into rushing, but I kept reminding myself, slow is smooth and smooth is smart. I even wrote that on a sticky note and put it on my laptop. It became my motto. I learned to embrace the pause. I learned to be okay with silence between thoughts. Because in those quiet seconds, my brain had space to think smart, not just speak fast. Eek. And you know what's wild? Over time, the pauses got shorter. Not because I forced them to shrink, but because my brain naturally adjusted. It stopped panicking. It trusted that I would find the words, that I had the skills, that I could speak like a real communicator, not a memorizer. And from that place of trust, my fluency started flowing more naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I wasn't just using English anymore, I was living in it. One afternoon, not long after that, I was standing in line at Target. I had a few items in my cart, and I noticed a lady ahead of me trying to return a blender. She was clearly frustrated, explaining something to the cashier. And even though I wasn't part of the conversation, my brain automatically kicked in. She probably bought the wrong size. Maybe she's having trouble with the receipt. I was narrating the moment in my head without trying. And that's when it hit me. My brain was finally thinking in English, not just reacting, but observing, processing, and describing. That tiny moment of realization made me smile. And I knew then I was ready to go one step further. If I could slow down my brain to speak better, maybe I could speed it up to think faster in everyday moments. Instead of waiting for a situation to challenge me, maybe I could create those challenges. Maybe I could turn real life into a language gym where I trained my mind every day just by noticing things around me. I felt excited, like I was about to unlock a new level of fluency. So, right there at the checkout line, with my cart full of groceries and my mind full of English thoughts, I made a new promise to myself. From now on, I will turn every ordinary moment into a thinking game. I left Target that day with more than just groceries. I left with a plan. A quiet but powerful idea had started forming in my mind, something that felt both simple and genius. If my brain could already process and describe what was happening around me in English, then why wasn't I using that more? Why wasn't I turning those ordinary moments into something meaningful? Into practice, real-life practice, the kind that sticks. I remember walking through the parking lot with my tote bag hanging off my shoulder, and I saw a mom loading her car. She had one toddler sitting in the cart, kicking his feet and giggling while she tried to open the trunk. Right then, without even thinking, my brain whispered, "She looks tired, probably had a long day. Maybe she picked up snacks for the weekend." Those were just small, simple thoughts, but they came in English, and that was huge. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was brushing my teeth, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, and I realized something. I didn't need a textbook. I didn't need flashcards. I didn't even need a teacher. What I needed was awareness, the ability to take any moment from my real, everyday life and turn it into a thinking challenge, a language workout, right there in my head. So I decided to make it a daily habit. Every morning, every afternoon, every chance I got, I'd turn normal situations into English-speaking games. Not just repeating phrases like a robot, but using my brain to play with language, to describe, to question, to predict, to imagine. This wasn't about grammar drills anymore. This was about living inside the language. The next morning, I tested my idea. I walked to my local park with a small coffee in hand, like I did almost every Saturday. It was quiet except for the sound of dogs barking and birds singing. I sat on the bench near the walking path, and right on cue, people started passing by. I saw a man in running shoes, sweating and breathing hard. My brain started working. He probably ran 2 or 3 miles. Maybe he's training for a race. Then I saw 2 teenagers on skateboards laughing. They're probably skipping homework, enjoying the weekend. Then a mom pushing a stroller. Her baby looks like he's falling asleep, or maybe he just woke up. I kept going like that for 20 minutes straight. No phone, no book, just me and my thoughts in English. And for the first time, I felt like I was training my brain naturally, without pressure, without fear. The best part? It was kind of fun. It made boring moments interesting. Standing in line, sitting in traffic, waiting for the microwave to beep, I turned all of it into language practice. I'd look around and silently ask myself questions in English. What's she doing? What's he feeling? What might happen next? I called it observation mode, and that became my secret tool. It felt like I was hacking my mind, feeding it real, everyday language through real, everyday experiences. It didn't matter if I was alone. I could be anywhere. A gas station, the DMV, even the laundry room, and I'd play the same mental game. I'd look at someone folding clothes and say to myself, she's sorting whites and colors. That's a huge pile. Maybe she's doing laundry for her whole family. And here's the crazy part. It didn't stay inside my head for long. The more I practiced observation mode, the more ready my brain became to actually speak when someone did talk to me. Like the time I was at Trader Joe's picking out avocados. A guy next to me chuckled and said, "They're either rock solid or mushy, huh?" My brain didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I just laughed and said, "Yeah, it's like avocado roulette." And he laughed back. That tiny conversation, so random and short, made me feel like I was finally part of the rhythm. Like my brain had learned how to stay on beat with the flow of real life. I also started journaling in a different way. Not writing about my feelings or big ideas, but describing what I saw that day. I'd write things like, "This morning I saw a woman in a yellow raincoat walking her dog. The sidewalk was wet, and she looked like she was in a hurry. Maybe she was late for work." It was simple, but effective. I was telling small stories in English, stories based on real things around me. Over time, my brain stopped translating from my native language. It just started speaking in English from the very beginning. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it felt real and lasting. Even my commute became part of the game. I'd take the L train to work in the morning, and while I stood by the window watching the city roll by, I'd play what I called the narration game. I'd describe what I saw, silently in my head, like I was doing a voiceover for a movie. A man is rushing to catch the train. He's holding a coffee in one hand and typing on his phone with the other. There's a pigeon on the platform. It's not afraid of people. It may sound silly, but that game sharpened my mind more than any grammar book ever could. It trained me to think fast and speak smart, because it made me more aware, more ready, more connected to the language. I didn't keep it all in my head forever either. I started talking out loud. I do solo commentaries while cooking. "Okay, now I'm chopping onions. Don't cry, don't cry. These knives are dull. Gotta sharpen them soon." Or while cleaning the kitchen, "Let's wipe down the counters. Yikes, how did I miss this spot?" These weren't fancy sentences, but they were mine. They came naturally, and every time I spoke out loud, even if no one else was around, I gave my mouth permission to keep up with my brain. And the more I did it, the faster my thoughts came in English. I also began using what I called the what if technique. If I saw someone on the street, I'd ask myself, what if I had to give them directions right now? Then I'd answer, okay, I'd say, keep going straight 2 blocks, then turn left by the bakery. The post office will be right there. Or I'd pretend someone asked me about my weekend, and I'd mentally respond, oh, I went to the farmer's market on Sunday, tried this amazing blueberry pie. These mini mental dialogues made me feel ready for real ones. So when a coworker did ask me on Monday, "How was your weekend?" I already had an answer prepared. Not memorized, but mentally rehearsed. This technique didn't just make me better at English, it made me more present. I started paying closer attention to my surroundings. I noticed the little things. The guy in the parking lot trying to balance 3 pizzas on his arm, the teenager at Starbucks sketching something in his notebook, the couple in the park trying to teach their dog how to roll over. I saw these moments, lived in them, and named them. And naming things in English made my world feel more mine. I wasn't just passing through America anymore, I was living it, describing it, owning it. I remember one specific Saturday that felt like a personal milestone. I was walking through a flea market in a nearby neighborhood. I had no real plan, just browsing. I saw a booth with handmade soaps and lotions, and the lady behind the table said, "You can smell them if you want." I smiled and picked one up. Lavender. I nodded and said, "This one reminds me of my grandma's garden. She used to grow lavender in the backyard." The lady smiled and said, "Aw, that's sweet. I love that smell too." Just like that, I had a full, meaningful exchange. And it started from a moment I used to avoid, small talk with strangers. But now, I welcomed it. Because all those mental games had trained me to show up, not just think, but connect. Even when I didn't speak out loud, the thinking itself had rewired my brain. It made my English faster, my responses sharper. And as I kept turning daily life into language games, I started seeing myself differently. I wasn't just a language learner anymore, I was a language user, someone who thinks, feels, and responds in English. And that feeling? It was worth every quiet practice moment, every invisible game, every solo sentence I ever whispered in my kitchen. And so, day by day, step by step, my brain was getting faster. Not because I crammed vocabulary or memorized scripts, but because I made the real world my classroom. Every moment became an exercise. Every person, a prompt. Every experience, a chance to sharpen my thinking. But there was still one more thing I had to face, the part I'd been avoiding the most. I had trained my mind to think fast, sure. I'd even learned to speak better in casual conversations, but what about moments when I couldn't find the perfect word? What about those times when I still stumbled or paused or couldn't say exactly what I wanted? That's when I realized the next level wasn't about finding perfect words. It was about letting go of them. Even though I had built so much progress, training my brain to slow down, observe real life, and think in English, there was still a hidden fear I hadn't fully addressed. It would sneak up on me in unexpected moments. Like when I was about to join a conversation with native speakers, and suddenly, my chest would tighten. My brain would fill with questions. What if I mess up? What if I don't say it right? What if they laugh, or worse, correct me? It was this silent pressure I kept putting on myself to say the right thing, the exact word, the smart-sounding phrase, and that pressure made me feel small. I would stand there with thoughts in my head, but my mouth would stay closed, afraid of not being good enough in English. This fear followed me even in small moments. One evening, I was sitting at a friend's house with a few coworkers. They were laughing and swapping stories about their weekend plans. Someone turned to me and asked, "So, what are you doing this Saturday?" I had an answer ready. I wanted to go hiking at Starved Rock, but I hesitated. I couldn't remember the word trail. That tiny blank in my vocabulary made me freeze. I smiled nervously and said, maybe just like walking in the forest? Everyone nodded politely, but I felt so frustrated with myself. I kept thinking, why couldn't I remember one simple word? That night, I lay in bed, replaying that conversation over and over, and then I asked myself something that changed everything. Did they understand me? The answer was yes. They knew what I meant. I didn't say the perfect word, but I communicated the idea. And that realization hit hard. You don't need perfect words to be understood. I had been chasing a version of English that didn't even exist. Native speakers mess up too. They pause, they say like, and they forget words and rephrase. I started thinking, why am I holding myself to a standard they don't even use? That was the night I promised myself, I'm going to speak up, even if the words aren't perfect. From that moment on, I shifted the way I approached every conversation. I gave myself permission to speak in my English, simple, clear, and real. I stopped hunting for advanced vocabulary and started leaning into the basics. When I didn't know a fancy word, I used a simple one. If I didn't know the exact phrase, I explained it another way. It wasn't about sounding like a textbook. It was about connecting with people. I remember testing this approach the very next week at work. My team was in a brainstorming meeting about a new product campaign. Usually, I'd stay quiet, just listening and taking notes, afraid of saying something wrong. But this time I jumped in. I said, I think we could try an idea that's easy for customers to understand, like a guide or a starter pack. My grammar wasn't perfect, and I had to pause once to find the right word. But my manager nodded and said, That's actually a great direction. Keep going. That one moment gave me more confidence than months of studying vocabulary lists. It proved to me that fluency isn't about perfection. It's about participation. I started noticing how often I had been filtering myself. In restaurants, I'd avoid chatting with waiters because I didn't want to mess up my tenses. At the bank, I would just nod instead of asking follow-up questions. On Zoom calls, I would type my ideas in the chat instead of saying them out loud. But now, I started doing the opposite. I made myself speak, even when I felt nervous. Even when I knew I might make a mistake. Because every time I spoke, I grew stronger. Every time I hid, I stayed stuck. One of the most empowering moments came during a phone call with a customer service rep. I had to call my internet provider to fix an issue with my router. Before, I would have avoided that call for days, hoping someone else could do it for me. But I grabbed the phone, took a deep breath, and said, Hi, I'm having trouble with my internet connection. It keeps stopping every few minutes. I had to explain my address, my plan, the situation, and I didn't use fancy words. I used the words I had. And guess what? I got it done. No embarrassment, no breakdown, just results. And that's when I truly believed simple English is strong English. The more I practiced speaking without perfection, the freer I felt. I started talking to strangers at grocery stores, in elevators, at the gym. One day, I helped a tourist in Chicago who looked lost. She asked me where Millennium Park was, and I said, Keep walking straight until you see the bean. It's on the left side. She smiled and said, Thanks, that was super clear. Moments like that gave me proof. You don't need advanced English to be helpful. You need clear English. And that kind of English comes from courage, not a dictionary. I also started practicing out loud with myself. In the morning, I'd look in the mirror and describe how I felt. I'm sleepy, I didn't sleep much, I need coffee. During walks, I'd pretend I was explaining the neighborhood to a visitor. That's a public library. It's small but really nice. I go there to read sometimes. These little habits added up. My thoughts began turning into words more quickly, and those words didn't have to be perfect. They just had to exist. Eventually, I got more comfortable being imperfect in group conversations. One time, I was at a friend's birthday party, and someone brought up politics, a topic I usually avoided because of the complex vocabulary. But I joined in. I said, I'm still learning about this, but I think it's important people vote, even if they feel like nothing changes fast. Was it deep? Maybe not, but it was my voice in the conversation. And people nodded. Some even added to what I said. It felt good, not because I sounded like an expert, but because I sounded like me. That became my new focus. Progress, not perfection. I made a goal to speak at least once in every group setting, even if it was just one comment. I made a rule that if I didn't know a word, I'd explain around it instead of freezing. I also kept a small notebook where I jotted down words I had wanted to say but couldn't find in the moment. Later, I'd look them up, not to memorize, but just to give my brain more tools for next time. Learning became lighter. Speaking became less scary. My turning point came during a presentation at work. My boss asked me to give a 5-minute update on my team's progress. I was nervous, but I prepared my ideas using simple language. I practiced once in front of the mirror, then gave the presentation using bullet points, not a script. I forgot one phrase halfway through, but I smiled and said, "Let me say that another way," and I kept going. Afterward, a coworker told me, "You speak so clearly. It's easy to follow your ideas." That compliment meant more to me than praise for vocabulary. It meant I had communicated. I had connected. And from that point on, I stopped trying to fix my English. I started using it fully, proudly, and naturally. Yes, I still learned new words. Yes, I still made mistakes. But those things didn't define me anymore. I wasn't afraid to say, "What's the word for beat?" or "I don't know how to explain this exactly," but that honesty made me human, and that humanity made me relatable. So now, when I meet other English learners, especially new immigrants, international students, or folks who feel shy, I always tell them, don't wait for perfect English. It's not coming, but your English is already good enough to be used. Speak it, share it, shape it as you go. Because speaking smart isn't about using perfect words. It's about being brave enough to use your words. And honestly, that realization set me free. But it also made me reflect. If I could slow down to think better and use real life to sharpen my thoughts and speak without perfect words, then something even deeper had changed in me. It wasn't just about language anymore. It was about confidence, about owning my voice. And I realized maybe this whole journey was never just about speaking English. Maybe it was about becoming the version of me who doesn't hold back. Looking back now, I can barely believe where I started. That girl who froze in coffee shops, who stayed quiet in meetings, who waited and waited for perfect words that never came. She was scared. She thought mistakes made her look weak. She thought people would judge her if she didn't sound native. But now, I smile when I think about her. Because that girl didn't give up. She showed up every day. She practiced in silence. She spoke through fear. She kept going, one small sentence at a time. And because of her, I'm here today, speaking freely, thinking fast, and connecting with people in a language that once terrified me. No, my English isn't perfect, but it's mine. It's honest. It's human. It helps me work, make friends, ask questions, share stories, and live my life fully. That's what fluency really means. It's not about sounding like someone else. It's about sounding like you and still being understood. So, if you're watching this and you're still holding your voice back, I want you to know this. You don't have to wait until your English is good enough. You don't have to memorize the dictionary. You don't need perfect grammar to sound smart. You don't even need to speak fast to keep up. What you do need is the courage to start. To speak up when it feels uncomfortable, to describe your world one thought at a time, to use what you know, and trust that more will come. Because every single time you speak, even with broken words, you're building a bridge between your mind and the world around you. And that bridge, it's more powerful than perfection will ever be. So today, I want you to stop chasing perfect English and start using your real English, because that's where fluency lives. That's where your voice begins. And trust me, the world is waiting to hear it.